Hi everyone, welcome to the third and final video of week 5. So we've gone through Wittgenstein's argument for the conclusion that there are things that propositions can't represent, and we've looked at how if you draw out that conclusion's ramifications, you'll come to the view that much of philosophy is nonsense, and that this is exactly Wittgenstein's view, and particularly lots of metaphysics is nonsense, if not all of metaphysics, and philosophical statements which attempt to employ modal notions are bound to be nonsensical, according to Wittgenstein. Well, now we arrive at a really interesting feature of the Tractatus, which I'll state the problem, won't go into it in too much detail in this video, but we'll discuss it much more in the in-person sessions. If you've been reading the Tractatus, which we have, and even listening to this video, which we have, you'll have noticed that when I've given Wittgenstein's arguments for the conclusion that there are things that propositions can't represent, and particularly for the conclusion that metaphysics is nonsense and statements employing modal notions are nonsense, you'll have noticed that I've been employing modal notions all the way through the discussion. In order to draw the conclusion that metaphysics is nonsense, I've had to employ metaphysical arguments about possibilities. So the argument was roughly that there's no such thing as a logical form because logical forms are distributed amongst the combinatorial potential or possibilities of structure built into the constituents of the thing, the proposition or the state of affairs. There's no such unit or object answering to the phrase logical form. Rather, logical form is distributive, built into the possibilities of combination, exhibited by the constituents of the thing in question. Well, I've just employed a load of modal notions in order to draw that conclusion. Talked about possibilities of combination. I've used the word logical form illegitimately in order then to say, look how illegitimate that use was. So the arguments I was using, if they are correct, if the arguments are valid, and metaphysics is nonsense, then the arguments that I used to show that metaphysics was nonsense must themselves be nonsensical. This is the problem. So, in order to get to the conclusion that metaphysics is nonsense, that philosophy is nonsense, Wittgenstein's employed arguments exploiting modal notions. He's talking about possibility all the time in the Tractatus. If you just read the first 2 pages, he's talking about possibility all the time, employing modal notions. So if his arguments are valid, that those notions are illegitimate, then the arguments are illegitimate. Where does that leave us? Well, Wittgenstein says at the end of the book that his propositions, if we understand his propositions correctly, we'll see that they are nonsense. And Wittgenstein says that we have to use the propositions as a ladder that we then, after having climbed up the ladder, kick away. So we use the propositions to climb up to a certain correct point of view, from which we have an excellent logical vantage point. You can see with clear eyes the nonsense of all of millennia's worth of philosophy. Then we have to kick those propositions away, the propositions that we've used to get to that vantage point. We have to kick them away and go, they're nonsense as well. So we have a kind of paradox. If the arguments of the Tractatus are correct, then they don't mean anything. If they don't mean anything, how can they be correct? This is baffling. It's a serious problem. Wittgenstein doesn't really he doesn't provide a satisfying solution to the problem, and it's been the task of, virtually a century's worth of scholars now, almost exactly a century's worth of scholars now, to try and reconcile Wittgenstein's views, namely that metaphysics and philosophy is nonsense, and also that the arguments he's used to get to that conclusion are themselves metaphysical and philosophical, obviously. So, I mean, that's the issue. That's the notorious paradox of the Tractatus. That's why it's, I suppose, why it's captured people's interest. It presents itself kind of as a riddle, I think, or some people have said it's a joke. I'm not sure what to think, but we can discuss it much more, as I say, in the sessions. And we'll see what all of you think about this. If you think that the paradox of the Tractatus is sufficient reason to reject it, or if you think there's some kind of deep mystical insight buried within that paradox that we can somehow extract while remaining faithful to all of Wittgenstein's stated claims and conclusions. Who knows? We'll see. Okay, thanks guys. Look forward to discussing it with you.